This is Liberty's Voice, our inaugural program. Here we go. Hello, America. Mr. and Mrs. America, thanks for being here for our inaugural program, our video podcast. People have said to me, Mark, don't you have enough to do? Actually, I do. But let me tell you this. I'm just tired of these podcasters. I'm tired of the whole cesspool this business has become. There's no need for this. I mean, really, do people want to watch podcasts where people just go off on Jews and Christians and drop F-bombs and smoke pot and so forth? This is the dark side of humanity. And I know they have millions of viewers and followers, but it is the dark side of humanity. And I got to thinking, we have such a great country. We don't even fully understand our history, the philosophers who the founders relied on to develop this country, to fight a war, to put it in place. Do we really understand what the Declaration means and the Constitution means? Do we really understand the threats that we face today based on what took place 100, 150 years ago? Do we really understand what populism means or nationalism means? Or Islam and Marxism, Hegelism, and all these other things? We're going to take our time and break it down piece by piece. So when July 4th actually comes around, we're going to be more patriotic and excited about this country than ever before, and we're going to defend it stronger than ever before. We have enemies within, and they are here, and enemies without. They're not all illegal aliens. Some of them are very wealthy people who were born into this country, third, fourth, fifth generation, who are advancing a radical agenda, a kooky agenda, but they have followers. Then we're electing people in our cities who hate our country, who reject our economic system, who attack our founders. We're pulling down the monuments of the very men who created this great country. There needs to be pushback. There needs to be a concerted effort, at least by me, to explain to anybody who will listen, of how fantastic this society is. And those of us who are born into it, we are the luckiest people on the face of the earth. And from time to time, I will have to dip into the sewer to address people who are in the sewer and have audiences who are trashing us, trashing our faiths, trashing our country. But my goal is to educate, is to inform, is to reveal to you information that may not have been revealed to you by elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, high school teachers, and certainly not colleges and universities. And I've spent decades on this, so this is going to take a process. This is going to take a little while. One piece will build on top of the next. Not necessarily each and every program. Sometimes I may have to move into current events. Sometimes I may have to move somewhere else. That's what we're going to do. We have the flexibility and liberty to do it. I'm very excited that you're here. I view the radio program, I view Life, Liberty, and Living on Fox and this program as integrated in many respects. Different formats, different approaches, perhaps different audiences. Tell your friends and family if you like what you're hearing, even if you don't like what you're hearing. So that's the point of Liberty's Voice. Liberty's Voice is the voice of liberty. You, me, the American people. Let's get started with the Declaration. And yet our history doesn't begin with the Declaration. I'm starting there as a starting point. But during the course of the podcast over the next who knows how long, we're going to go to the beginning. That far precedes the Declaration, and we're certainly going to work our way up to today. So let's take a look at this Declaration, and let's not just view it as, oh, there's a few lines, yip-de-doo. Let's really dig into this. The relevant part, and there's a lot of relevant parts, but the relevant part I want to focus on is this. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Every word was thoroughly considered. At the Second Continental Congress, where the delegates were sent by the colonists. That's where this took place. The Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia at what we call Independence Hall. Independence Hall was the assembly room for the Pennsylvania legislature. The House of Representatives would meet on the first floor, and the Senate would meet on the second floor. Hence, The House is the lower house, and the Senate's the higher house. Anyway, let's get into this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That one phrase encapsulates the entire purpose of the revolution and the entire meaning of our government's establishment and existence. So it's worth breaking down, don't you think? Let's take a look at this. They talk about the Creator. Now, what's interesting to me is we're not allowed to talk about the Creator in classrooms today. That's God. And he's mentioned several times in the Declaration of Independence. If you go into a classroom today and say, I want to talk about the Creator, sorry, separation of church and state. Well, separation of church and state is not in the Declaration. It's not in the Constitution. It's based on a Supreme Court decision, about 70, 80 years ago. In fact, separation of church and state, a lot of people reference Thomas Jefferson on that. But Thomas Jefferson wasn't at the Constitutional Convention, even though he had input from afar in France, which he gave to Madison, but not often because of the distance. Now, what does that mean, separation of church and state? Separation of church and state means we're not going to create, enshrine, establish a government or country faith. That everybody is free to exercise their faith as long as they don't molest other faiths and other people practicing their faith. The Declaration is about individual liberty, sovereignty, individual sovereignty. And only when individual sovereignty is respected, recognized, promoted, nurtured, is a government legitimate. The government exists for the individual sovereignty, and the collective of individuals, which we call a society. John Locke, who we'll get to another day, so crucially important to the founders of this country. John Locke was the most important philosopher, most relied on by the revolutionaries, by the founders. During the constitutional period that would come later, it was Montesquieu. What was the basis of the thinking of both of these men and others who were relied on by your founders and the framers of the Constitution? The Enlightenment. These men were in the 1500s and 1600s, the Enlightenment. This is crucial. You have the Enlightenment, and yet the Declaration refers to Creator, God. What else does it refer to? We hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident. Well, truths are self-evident. That one sentence, it's not even a full sentence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Meaning every human being knows them to be true. Whether they follow them or not is a different issue. But if you use reason, or maybe intuit, certain principles and beliefs, every human being knows these truths to be true. For instance, the Golden Rule. Treat others as you would want yourself to be treated. Or the 10 Commandments, include thou shalt not kill, and so forth and so on. It doesn't mean every person will comply with it. There's evil people. There's evil regimes. It doesn't mean every government will comply with it. But their point is, we know this to be right. We know this to be true. These are truisms. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. What does that mean? All men are created equal. Well, that doesn't mean equal outcomes, because that would be inhumane. We're not machines. We're not to be counted like digits. We're individual human beings with our own DNA, our own flesh and blood, our own brains, our own motivations, our own minds, our own desires, individual sovereignty. So you can't have individual sovereignty and government-imposed equal outcomes at the same time, can you? Because that's not what they meant. It never even occurred to them. That would be tyranny. or what we would call today modern-day Marxism and so forth. Again, we'll get to that later. So we're talking about individual sovereignty, and yet you need to have a society. And John Locke talks about this. What's a society? It's these individuals with their own individual sovereignty that voluntarily agree to join together, what he called a social compact. You need rules to live by. You need laws, perhaps punishments for violating the rules and so forth and so on. And it's even broader than that. There's cultural issues, other types of issues, to bring people together, to assimilate into this society where the individual and free will is cherished and nurtured. But there are certain aspects of it which require community decisions. That's why later on, in another program, we'll talk about the importance of the Constitution, why it's broken down this way. The Declaration is the basis for the construct of the Constitution. Separation of powers. What's that all about? We'll get to that. We'll get to that. The people who attack the Constitution also attack the Declaration, as they must. And the people who attack the Declaration and the Constitution reject our country altogether. But let's go on. I'm getting ahead of myself. So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, meaning every human being has a right to live, has a right to free will, assuming they're moral and they're not violating societal rules, in other words, damaging somebody else's property or assaulting somebody else. So we mean in the rational framework of equal. And each individual should be treated the same way by the government under the same circumstances. What do we call that? Real justice. Your justice system should be applied as equally as possible. That they are endowed by their Creator, by God. These are God-given rights to every single human being, with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable, meaning what? The plain language. God gives you unalienable rights, meaning they belong to you. Nobody can take them. Voters can't take it. Dictators can't take it. No government can take it. They are your rights, given to you as an individual sovereign by God. That among these are life, the right to life, the right to life, liberty, free will, and the pursuit of happiness. That doesn't mean hedonism. That means to pursue what motivates you, using your intellectual and physical labor and abilities to pursue your own interests, to fulfill your own life's dreams. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. In other words, if we have to have a government, it's instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. From the consent of the governed. Again, the Lockean view of society and the social contract, the founders' view of individual sovereignty, of equality. Well, the only government that works and is aligned with that, or works parallel to that, or embraces that, is a representative government. Where we, the people, each of us and us as a collective, are represented by those who we choose to put in the government to represent us. I'm not going to get into the Constitution today. We've got plenty on our plate right now. Now, this Declaration of Independence is one of the greatest documents ever conceived, ever. And one of the reasons we were able to have a Declaration of Independence like this is because we didn't have a big history in America. And America was the new country. Well, it wasn't even a country yet. It was the new place, if you will. So it didn't have a history of kings and queens physically ruling over it. It didn't have a feudal economic system. It never suffered the consequences of a Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great or what have you. It was not touched by any of the crusades that took place. It was basically a clean slate. A clean slate. Locke was asked, you come up with these ideas, which we call the Enlightenment, about the individual and so forth, and well, where has this ever existed? He says, America. It has and will exist in America. America. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are contrary ideologies, and you've heard of one of them called Marxism. But people don't really understand Marxism. And again, in programs in the future, we're going to dive very deeply into Marxism. But for the purpose of our inaugural program right now, let's just touch on it. Karl Marx was a German. He wound up living in London because he was expelled from Germany because of his viewpoints and his belief system. Much of his early thinking came from a man by the name of Hegel. And again, if this seems a little overwhelming, we will get to that in future programs. Hegel. But Marx had this idea of what they call historical materialism. That basically materialism is the basis of all human thought, human activity, and human power. Materialism. Now, a footnote. Isn't that really what Bernie Sanders and Mondami and AOC and the rest of them talk about constantly? Affordability, redistribution of wealth, taxes. That's all they talk about. They never talk about faith. They never talk about the spirit. They never talk about Americanism. It's always about economics. And by the way, they're always wrong, but they always talk about economics. And in order to accomplish what they wish to accomplish, or what Marx wished to accomplish, you need an all-powerful, ubiquitous government. But they say you need it for the people. Marx split humanity basically into two classes, and later, when he was challenged, into subclasses of the two classes. The bourgeoisie, the powerful, the executives, the landowners, the managers, and the proletariat, the worker bees. And to put it simply, he basically said the worker bees surrender their power and their influence and their rights for a wage. It's not even a fair wage. But for their labor, nothing would exist. And so when it comes to equality, you need to redistribute wealth. You must destroy everything that came before. You must destroy this mentality that was born of the earliest times, ancient history, to feudalism, to what he called capitalism. He coined the word capitalism. It's the market system. But we'll play along. We'll call it capitalism because everybody else does. But he invented the word. He also invented this idea of class structures, the oppressed and the oppressor, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And we're going to get into him in great detail, but not in this program. So let me explain this. He believed private property rights should be eliminated. It was the bane of human existence. He believed faith was mysticism. Your religious beliefs get in the way of a progressive, advancing society. Get in the way of humanity. These are the old ways. It's nothing but mysticism, and it stops you from growing as an individual, but more importantly, from society growing. So you need to eliminate religion. You need to eliminate private property rights. And he would later say in the Communist Manifesto, you need to eliminate parental rights. Because he said parental rights are based on this ancient belief system. Parental rights. On this ancient belief system. And it is carried through to the family unit. There need not be a family unit. And if we are going to have this brand new society where equality reigns, where everybody is equal and equal outcomes, we have to get rid of all these old ways. Experience means nothing unless we learn to reject what came before. So experience means nothing, needs to be eliminated. History is misunderstood. It's about materialism and nothing else. All this claptrap, he would say, about natural rights, the creator, eternal truths, all of that must be removed. And he said in the Communist Manifesto and elsewhere, if that means a period of despotism, then so be it. As you and I know, he died in 1883, as I recall. Since Marxism has been in place, that period of despotism never ends, does it? What's the biggest problem with Marxism, other than it's defective every step of the way? It's defective because it rejects human nature. It tries to rejigger what God created. And so you have to destroy human nature. And in destroying human nature, you have to destroy human beings who those who run the country or run the party believe are not conforming, because conformity is the critical issue. Compliance, uniformity, equality of results. Human nature needs to be rejiggered, needs to be destroyed. How do you destroy what's in your brain? How do you destroy your thought process? How do you destroy your yearning to be who you want to be, to achieve what you want to achieve? And Marxism requires all of that. Regardless of what modern-day communists say, that's what it requires. The state is everything. And yet, Marx says, the state will wither away once we reach this panacea. After the Russian Revolution, Lenin, who led it, he said, Marx doesn't tell us exactly how to do this. Do what? How to institute Marxism. He doesn't tell us how to do this. So basically, we're going to have to do this our own way. And whether it's the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, whatever revolution that Marxism is involved in, that means mass slaughter, mass detention, a iron-fisted police state, and so forth and so on. Now, why do I tell you all this when I'm talking about the Declaration of Independence? Go back to the Declaration of Independence. What a fantastic document. The reason we have free speech, freedom of assembly, the reason we have due process, the reason we have all these civil liberties as human beings in this country is based on the Declaration of Independence. Well, this Declaration of Independence, where do these ideas come from? Eternal truths, natural law. It talks about natural law. What in the world is natural law? And the rules of nature. What is that, the jungle? No. Natural law and the law of nature, they're distinct, but for our purposes right now, it combines with, it fuses with the idea of individual sovereignty and eternal truths. That this is natural for human beings to want to own property, to want to live, to want to be happy. It is natural for human beings to have a culture, a common culture, to have rules by which to live, as long as they're just. In other words, this is the natural state of humanity. All this other stuff that man comes up with, whether it's Marxism or fascism or all the rest of the isms, that's unnatural. And the laws they put in place, those are man-made laws. They're not natural laws based on God's views. Well, how do we know what God's views are? The Judeo-Christian belief system. That's how we know. That's what the founders said too. The Judeo-Christian belief system. The founders read what we call, or what they called, the Hebrew Bible. They would be on the floor at the Declaration debating or the Constitution, and they would quote from memory, quote unquote, the Hebrew Bible. They also understood that Judaism and Christianity link. They have to link. Ten Commandments apply to both. Abraham applies to both. That is, there's a fusion for governing purposes. And so they believed in the Judeo-Christian belief system and value system. They told us they did. Joined with the Enlightenment, individualism. And Judaism and Christianity do fuse with the Enlightenment. This is why I wrote the book on power and have written other books, so people understand how crucial this is. So when people attack our founding, the Judeo-Christian belief system, which is the core of the Declaration, they're attacking our country. They're attacking the very essence of our country. They're attacking what took place 250 years ago. They're attacking our history. So if you're Tucker Carlson and you're constantly trashing Jews or Israel, Zionism, and Zionism simply means what? A Jewish homeland. You know, Muslims have over 50 Jewish homelands, over 50 majority Muslim countries. Nobody attacks them for having majority Muslim countries. What Islamists are attacked for is trying to destroy anybody who doesn't agree with them. There are Christian majority countries, ours as an example. I proudly underscore the fact that this is a Christian majority country, and thank God for that. Because Judaism and Christianity do embrace the Enlightenment and are the basis of the Declaration. And you can see what a fantastic society was created. So if you're one of these so-called influencers and podcasters who keep attacking a particular faith, Judaism, or Christian Zionists, who keep platforming people who attack Jewish people or Christian people who are believers, or keep platforming foreign governments that are led by people who completely reject the American founding and the American system. Oh, they'll work with it, they'll spend money on it, they'll try to influence it, they'll try to control it, that is, these other countries. But they reject it completely. If you're one of those podcasters, one of those influencers, a phrase I don't even like, but if you're one of them, you are attacking this country every bit as violently as Islamists and Marxists. You're aiding and abetting them. You cannot love your country, I don't care what they say, if you're attacking the fundamentals of the country. If you're attacking the fundamentals of the country. You, Mr. and Mrs. America, you understand this. You understand this. So when you have people who are among the most watched people on podcasting platforms, who day in and day out trash Judaism, trash Christianity, trash our governing system, day in and day out, push a Marxist type agenda, even Islamist type agenda, you are trying to destroy the country. This is the truth. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on this in the future as well. It's very, very important to understand this. Marxism is incompatible with Americanism. I just gave you a thumbnail sketch. Marx hated America. He derided the founders. He derided the Declaration and the Constitution. The people who would follow Marx in the United States after 1883, but not that much after that date, would label themselves progressives. They're always very good at labeling, sloganeering, and propaganda. Progressives, when they're really regressives. And there were a number of them, including Woodrow Wilson, who was a so-called scholar, and he became president of Princeton University and so forth, but he was a leading so-called progressive. And he wasn't the only one. There were several, and we'll be talking about them over the course of our year. There was John Dewey, who basically influenced our public education system even up to this point. In the 1920s, I believe it's 1928, he visits the new Russia, 10, 11 years after the Russian Revolution. And he's invited there, he goes there, Stalin's in charge, and he's watching the educational system, and he loves it. He says every course is about promoting the state and promoting the interests of the state and promoting the common interests of that society, whether it's mathematics or science or whatever it is. In America, we have these disparate educational systems, not even systems. It doesn't only depend on the states, but it might be a community, it might be a schoolhouse somewhere. We got to change that. We need a common educational system, whether it's in rural Arkansas or whether it's in New York City. And we need to use that educational system not just to quote unquote teach, but to educate. About what? About the social interests of the state. It starts with Dewey and it never ends, does it? Today we see what it's turned into: indoctrination about Islamism, DEI, transgenderism, you name it. And what else? Getting in between the parent and the child. Marxism, the Communist Manifesto. What do you mean parental rights? If a child wants to transition, the parent is a problem. If the child wants an abortion, the parent is the problem. The parent doesn't get to tell us what to teach. That's the Communist Manifesto, later carried on by John Dewey. So they called themselves progressives. I wrote an entire book on it. I call them American Marxists. These are the American Marxists. So you have Woodrow Wilson. You have a guy named Herbert Crowley. We'll discuss him down the road. You have John Dewey. You have a guy named Walter Weil. We'll get into him too. And you have a person you may have heard of. His name, Theodore Roosevelt. Now this gets interesting, a little complicated, but very interesting. Again, more down the road. This is our inaugural show, 45 minutes. We'll do other things. The progressives viewed themselves and wrapped themselves in populist propaganda. For the people, we the people, the People's Party. There was a People's Party, which was basically an American Marxist party. And there was an early battle in the late 1800s, early 1900s, into the 1920s over this Marxism/progressivism. And it would split into different viewpoints and so forth. Theodore Roosevelt was a quote-unquote progressive. And when I say American Marxism, that is to distinguish it from Marx and German Marxism and that kind of Marxism. But the ideas persist. The ideas are fundamental. You know, von Mises, who was a great Austrian economist, he once said, we all talk and think like Marxists now. He's right. He's gone, but he was right. And we do. Especially the Democrats, if you listen to how they speak. But Theodore Roosevelt was an admirer of this guy, Crowley. Herbert Crowley lived from 1869 to 1930. And Crowley co-founded the New Republic. He wrote a book called The Promise of American Life. Theodore Roosevelt wrote a long piece in the Republic at one point, talking about the new nationalism. You see, ladies and gentlemen, we have so-called influencer podcasters who want you to believe they're conservatives or they're MAGA, who talk just like Roosevelt did and others. We're not about nationalism. We're about Americanism. Nationalism, I thought we believed in federalism. I thought we believed in state sovereignty. I thought we believed in individual free will and sovereignty. Nationalism, think about it. National Socialist Party, nationalism? No. Americanism, a special form of government, a special application of beliefs to a government and society. We're not nationalists. We're Americans. We believe in Americanism. Your Constitution isn't a nationalist document. It's a uniquely American document that creates a republic. And then you hear about the populists that I just spoke of. These are the American Marxists. And you see a combining, they call it the horseshoe effect, of the populism and nationalism, the populists and the nationalists. But that's not Americanism. It's not Americanism. Being pro-America, pro-American sovereignty, pro-American institutions vis-a-vis international institutions like the UN and so forth, that's Americanism. That's Americanism. So this is the brief, very brief understanding of that aspect of what we're up against on the Marxist side, which we will elaborate on extensively in the programs ahead. But I want to touch now on our inaugural program on Islamism, which is a grave, grave threat to our society. I just said Marxism and Americanism are incompatible. Marxism wants to destroy Americanism. Several years ago, I said on radio and TV, and to Charlie Kirk, amongst others, Marxism and Americanism are also incompatible, utterly incompatible. Why? Islamism believes in Sharia law. If you believe Sharia law is the controlling law, now keep something in mind. Sharia law is not in the Quran per se. It is in effect an addendum, if you are, a codicil. But it is the law that Islamists in particular, and others, apply via the Quran. Sharia law is a separate group of laws, big laws and minuscule laws. Laws that control politics, personal behavior, how you eat, marriage, the treatment of women. It is a whole group of rules and laws that apply, it is argued, to people of the Muslim faith. Islamists believe that is the highest law. That alone makes clear that Islam is incompatible with Americanism. Islamism is incompatible with Americanism. That's why there can never be, from their perspective, assimilation. And how do I know that? Not just based on their ideological approach, but based on what their most revered scholars have written. Revolution by immigration, another term I've used. The reason why there are now 50 million Muslims in Europe, and it will soon be the second largest religion in America, it's not by accident. Muslim scholars in the late 50s and 60s urged, if you will, this kind of a crusade, this kind of mass population movement into Western countries. Not for the purpose of enjoying Western countries, for the purpose of destroying them. Because pure Islam, ideological, fundamental Islamism, cannot exist in competition with any other faith or lack of faith or any other belief. That's pretty tough, isn't it? Not unlike the Marxists. Pretty tough. This is why you see in the Middle East, this word Islamophobia was concocted by the Islamists to try and stop people from criticizing Islamism. There's a difference between criticizing Islamism as an ideology, which we're free to do in this country under the First Amendment, and we ought to do often, and attacking a Muslim, a human being who just wants to live in America and live a normal life. Islamists don't. We hear them today. We hear them in mosques today. We hear them in LA, in Dearborn, Michigan. We hear them in Paterson, New Jersey. We hear them all over the country. I play clips on radio. They're telling us what their objective is: to destroy the West, not to get along with anybody, to conquer. You see it playing out in Europe. You see it playing out in some of our streets in this country. The group CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, was founded in a hotel room, a Marriott hotel, next to the Philadelphia International Airport, as a Hamas front group that have influence in the United States. How do we know? Because the FBI had bugs in the room and caught them. It's one of the biggest organizations embraced by the Democrat Party. It's used by the media. The executive director of the organization celebrated October 7th. But that's not the only group. The Muslim Brotherhood, that's the mothership. They exist throughout the United States of America, throughout Europe. They're funded by Qatar and other Islamist regimes. Getting a little ahead of myself. Islamism is incompatible with Americanism, with the Declaration. The Enlightenment and Judeo-Christian belief system. Now, importantly, I want to mention something. And I write about this in Liberty and Tyranny and elsewhere. If you're not Jewish or not Christian, that's your absolute right. I mean, there are Christians that have different belief systems, and some are more orthodox and fundamentalist than others. There are Jews that have broken down into little sects and so forth. Again, some are more orthodox than others and so forth. And you get to live in America too. And you get to practice your faith the way you wish, or no faith at all. You can worship apples if you want to. Nobody cares. That's the genius of the Judeo-Christian belief system. That is, it's created a society, this society, where people who are non-believers or believe something else are free to do so. Because the combination of the Judeo-Christian belief system and values and the Enlightenment creates such a society. Those types of societies don't exist where Islamism rules the day. In a Qatar, in a Saudi Arabia, in really any Arab/Muslim country in the Middle East. Coexistence is not really a word. Don't you love these cars where the bumper sticker coexist and it's got all the face on it and so forth? I said, well, you're dreaming. I mean, you can coexist in America. You can coexist in a free Western society, but there's a big chunk of the world where you cannot coexist. There's only exist if you're lucky. So the ideas that serve as the basis for Islamism, and again, we're going to dig into all these issues much more deeply as time goes on, do not jibe with the American system, the Judeo-Christian belief system, and the Enlightenment. Now, that doesn't mean people of the Muslim faith can't practice their faith in America. It just means our society was created with that belief system, so they're free to do it. There's so many fantastic aspects to our history, to our society, to the philosophers that we relied on, to certain philosophers today that do not get the time and attention that they deserve and that we need them to get. So we really understand the greatness of this country, the founding 250 years ago, what led to it, what came from it. We are a great people, a great people. When you have Tucker Carlson pointing to Qatar, and there you don't have to lock your Lamborghini's door, trashing our own country, I think to myself, and this guy has millions of followers, they must be mostly overseas, but he's not alone. When you have a Candace Owens, who is unhinged, who in my view needs mental assistance, and she has followers, what is that? Sort of a peephole where hundreds of thousands of people can look in as she bounces off padded walls? I don't know what that is. Or when you have others who think that smoking pot really is attractive it's really attractive and it's something you want to watch and spend your time watching, well, then go to a corner of a major city. You can watch that all day long. People doing drugs and smoking pot. Or people who have an endless conga line of guests, purposely chosen so they can bounce their thoughts off of them, and so forth and so on. Look, I don't know if I'll have guests. Maybe I'll have guests down the road. I'm open to that idea, but like talk radio, I don't have guests to have guests. We're not going to do that. If a person is particularly compelling and thoughtful, we will do that. So, this is the first program of Liberty's Voice. I really want to press the case for America and patriotism, why it's worth defending, why we're going to celebrate our 250th anniversary, and why it's worth also pointing out and addressing, when we have to, the people who would destroy our country from within and without. So, Mr. and Mrs. America, spread the word. Thank you, and God bless you.